Okay, guys, let's now move to question 6.4. Without any waste of time, I'll just quickly read through the question. I've copied it. Let me just check on the question paper if I've copied it correctly. So the question says use the graph to solve for x if 6.4.1 f of x is greater or equals to 0. So let's quickly have a look at our graph. So as you can see, we've got our graph with almost all the information that we need. And remember, guys, for all the previous questions that we have been solving, when we find the correct values, we're writing them on the graph. So remember, on one of the previous questions, we calculated the x-intercept of the graph of f. We actually managed to calculate both the x-intercepts. And at b, it was -4. At that point there, it was 4. So now, okay, now I see a question there. Okay, so I'll just quickly explain what that sign mean, and also explain in details how to verify if your answer is correct, and again how we arrived at that final answer. So remember, guys, the question says use the graph to, I've underlined, solve for x only if 6.4.1 f of x, remember f of x is the graph of f. So solve for x where f of x is greater or equals to 0. So that means our focus is along the x-axis because the question says solve for x. If it was solve for y, then our focus was going to be on the y-axis, meaning our answer will come from the y-axis. But in this case, all of our answers should be coming from the x-axis because we are solving for x. So it's more like it's x-axis in relation to these two graphs. So some of the information, we can simply have a look at the graph and be able to easily give the answer straight away. And again, I will show you another method using a calculator to confirm your answers. I'm not sure if that explanation gives you an idea of what we're dealing with, but otherwise I think as we go deeper, that's when you'll develop a better understanding. So okay, so now let's have a look at the graph. Now we are concentrating on the graph of f. Always remember we've got two graphs on this Cartesian plane, the graph of g and the graph of f. So we know we've got -4, we've got 4. So these are the two x-intercepts of the graph of f. So that means our answer will be based on these two x-coordinates or x-intercepts. So you can only struggle to write that inequality sign, but I'll just explain to you why we've got x is less or equals to -4, or x it's greater or equal to 4. So normally what I normally advise my students to do in this type of questions, you just say x -4 or x you write 4. So the reason to that is because you know your answer will come from these 2 points, because these are the points along the along the x-axis in relation to the graph of f. So now we have to look at these 2 points and indicate at which points, or indicate the inequalities which makes this statement to be true. So we already know at this point, that's where we know the graph of f can be greater or equals to 0. So now coming to the signs, let's see. At -4 going in that direction, when we punch the values from a -4 going in that direction, do we get the answers which are greater or equals to 0? When we punch the values from that point going in that direction, do we get the values which are greater or equals to 0? So that's actually the question that we should be asking ourselves. So now let's just check. Remember the formula for the graph of f. I'm not sure if you remember from the previous equation. Let me just write it here and say f of x, it's equals to, if you remember, it's half x squared minus 8. So we are going to then substitute those values in place of x. So let's see. Obviously, let's see, we've got, obviously after -4 we can use maybe -6. It's just any number which is less than -4, and again on this side we can choose 6. Obviously it's +6, so it could be 10, it could be 9, it could be 1000. So let's first start with -6 and see what answer we get. Okay, let's see. We've got I'm not sure if that light it's going to be an issue, but I will just check. Then we start with -6 squared minus 8. Okay, let's see what answer we can. You see, we get a value which is 10. Then we use that value to compare with this statement. Let's see, f of x is greater or equals to 0. So we can then use less than sign. So that's how you get the sign. Let me quickly explain again. So remember guys, my answer to that question is where x is less or equals to -4. That's where the graph of f is greater or equals to 0. So what I'm actually saying is that from that point going in that direction, that's where this graph of f is greater or equals to 0. And again, you can see from that point the graph is actually increasing in that direction. So can you see from that point going up, it's actually greater, and we say or equals to because that -4 is included. If you substitute -4 on that formula, you'll probably get 0. Let's see, -4. Can you see? You get 0. So that means from that point, the graph of f is again equals to 0, and at the same time going up, it's greater than 0. That's why on our answer, we say where x is less or equals to -4. That's where the graph of f is greater or equals to 0. So that 10, okay, that 10 obviously it's greater than 0. That's why it suits this answer. So now let's try to explain the second part of our answer. Let's see. We now test with 6. It's 1/2 into 6 close bracket squared minus 8. So that means we're expecting an answer which is it could be greater, it could be less than 0, but depending on the answer that we get, it will determine the inequality sign that we must use for this answer. So let's say, remember, I just wrote x, and then again I left a space for the sign, and then I wrote 4. So we are testing values which are greater than 4. So when we punch, let me just do this so that you can be able to see the answer. I hope it's clear. You're able to see that light is not causing a disturbance there. So when I punch it's equals to or equal sign, I'm expecting an answer which is greater than 0. If I get an answer which is greater than 0, then it means the inequality that I'm going to use there is greater or equal to. So that will be the inequality that I'm going to use there. But otherwise, if I find a value which is less than 0, which is a negative answer, then the sign that I'm going to use there is going to be less than or equals to. So let's see. Can you see? I also get a positive value which is greater than 0. So that means where x is greater or equals to 4, that's where the graph of f, let me show you, that's where the graph of f is greater or equals to 0. Remember that or equal to 0, that or equal to 0. I'm sure this is not funny, guys. So that equal to 0, it means this 4 is included as part of the answer. That means if you substitute 4 on the formula, you should get a 0. Okay, that's fine. Let's go back, delete and enter 4. So that means the answer that we get when we substitute 4, it should be 0. Let's see. Can you see? It's 0. So that's why the answers for this question is it's where x is less or equals to -4. That's where the graph of f is greater or equals to 0. And again, where x is greater or equals to 4, that's where the graph of f is greater or equals to 0. So with regards to this sign being less or equals to, it's influenced by the question itself, because on the question they are saying where f of x is greater or equals to. So otherwise, if it was just greater, even on these answers, we're just going to use the sign less than, and on this one we're just going to use greater than, meaning the question would be asking the values of x where the graph of f is just greater than 0. So that means these two values would not be included as part of the answer, because when you substitute, it gives you 0 whereas the question would be asking for x values where the graph of f is greater than 0. I'm not sure if it makes sense, but my advice is that if it doesn't make sense, just try to repeat this video and listen to that part. Somehow I'm sure it's going to make sense, or otherwise just write these two questions where it's f of x greater and equal to 0, use a calculator, and again write the same question where f of x is just greater than 0. Then you will notice that you are actually forced to use the sign used on the question. So let's see, there's a suggestion there. Okay, that's a very good suggestion. So let's use the values which are between -4 and 4 and see what happens. Okay, I'll guess and explain. Let's use 0. So you can use 0, you can use -1, -2, -3, but not -4, because -4 is part of the answer. So we're looking for values which are between these 2 points. So that means you can use -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, you can use up to 3. So let's see. When we use 0, according to my explanation, it means the answer that we get, it will be less than 0. So that means it will be a negative value. And you see, we get -8. Let's try with -2. We're going to get a negative value. Can you see? -6. Then let's use 3. Even when we use 3, we're still going to get a negative value. Can you see? -3.5. Let's use 2. Can you see? We get -6. Even if we use 1, we still get a negative number, even if we use 0. So can you see what I'm talking about, guys? In case if you're not able to see it clearly, I'm sure you can try to punch that on your calculator and see the values that you get. So I hope now you probably have a better understanding of how to approach or answer this type of questions. The moment that you've been waiting for, it's fine. So when coming to marking this question, obviously remember this question, it's given 2 marks. So we obviously give you 1 mark for that answer, and again we give you 1 mark for that answer. So I'm not sure if I can include question 6.4.2 into this answer. Let's just give it a try. I'm sure I can do it quicker, but then my worry is if you guys are going to understand. Okay, so let's just quickly try to move to question 6.4.2. So still in this case, remember 6.4 is for both, that statement is for both questions. So they're saying still use the graph to solve for x if the graph of f and g are both strictly increasing. So we're still focusing on the x-axis, and we need to give 2 values along the x-axis where both of these graphs are strictly increasing. So because I've already noticed exactly at which 2 points these 2 graphs are increasing, let me just go straight to those 2 points. I just want to do something here. So let's have a look at this graph. If you can check, guys, let's start from 0. If you can check from 0 going in that direction, are we having both of these graphs, the graph of f and the graph of g, increasing? The answer to that question is no. Why? Because you can see the graph of g, it's going in the opposite direction when you compare to the graph of f, right? So let's now move to between 0 and 5. So between 0 and 5, you've got this graph going up, and then it comes down. And then from there, you've got this graph going up, and this one is moving in the opposite direction between 0 and 5. So it doesn't work out. So let's check between 0 and that point, which is 4. So between those 2 points, you can see you've got this graph going, okay, can you see you've got that graph going up, and then now it comes down. Then it's actually up to that point. It's actually up to that point. We've already tested it up to that point. It failed. Also up to that point, it failed. So it means we test starting from 0. So it means we test starting from 0 going in that direction. Starting from 0 going in that direction. Up to there, it failed. Up to there, it also failed. So now let's try to see up to there. Remember, guys, this is, I'm not sure, I think it's called the axis of symmetry. That's where we split the graph of G into half. So that point, it's 2. Remember, we're given those coordinates where at the turning point x is 2 and y it's 9. So let's have a look. From 0 up to 2, we've got the graph of G, can you see, strictly increasing. And we also have the graph of F strictly increasing. So that means between these 2 points, that's where both of these graphs are increasing. So if you want to see it nicely, let's try to do this. So forget about everything outside of these 2 points and only focus in between. Can you see you've got the graph of F going up, you've got the graph of G also increasing. So these are the 2 points where both of these graphs are strictly increasing. That's why we've got our answer as this thing, guys, where you have less than, you have x, you have less than. It simply means between these 2 points. So that's what it means. So at a point where 0 is less than x, again at a point where x is less than 2, which simply means between 0 and 2. That's where you have the graph of F and G both strictly increasing. Otherwise, with other words, one can still say at where x is greater than 0 or at where x is less than 2. Why am I having a sign changed there? It's because we are saying 0 is less than x. So that means x is greater than 0. Can you see? So it's either you write it this way or you write it that way. So in terms of giving you the marks, so we give you 1 mark obviously for the answers and the second mark for that correct notation. So this question is also allocated 2 marks. So it's been a long answer, but I hope with that information you'll be having an idea of what we're dealing with. And again, you can use the same information to solve upcoming questions. Okay, thanks guys. I'll just end it here.